Hello everyone, I'm James Rosen.
And I'm Dave Kemble, and this is the Practicus
Digital Transformation Podcast. Hello everyone, this week we're incredibly excited to be joined in the studio by Sharon. Sharon is a seasoned IT executive with global experience in business transformation and operations. She's worked across multiple industries, including financial services, banking, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, retail, oil and gas, and logistics. She works as a strategic partner and is focused on building and delivering IT and digital strategies and solutions closely aligned with business goals. Welcome, Sharon.
Hi, thank you very much.
No problem at all. Lovely to have you here. In keeping with tradition, the first question we're asking everyone is quite simply, what does digital mean to you?
It is a great question. And I think depending on who asks me the question, I'll give a different answer. So the dictionary definition of digital is very clear. It's all about digits and technology enabling things to happen. That's the basic dictionary definition. But when I was appointed in the role that I'm in now, which is about 2 months ago, I joined IMI Critical Engineering. I was explaining to a friend of mine on a Zoom chat that I'd just been appointed into this role as a divisional digital director. And she was like making all the right noises. Wow, that sounds really great. You know, what will you be doing? You know, where's the company based? In the background was her 11-year-old son. I didn't realize that he was actually in the room while we were talking. And he popped his head into the camera view and says, what does digital actually mean? What are you actually going to be doing? And I said, well, I'm digitizing the business. But what do you mean by that? And it was quite interesting when he asked the question. Even joining IMI, everyone has a different perspective on what digital actually means. But for me, digital is really around, for a company, it's about how you actually engage with your customers. How you use the technology to do that engagement and how you actually drive value through the capability. It isn't all just about the technology. There are lots of other elements that are surrounding it that needs to be considered. So for me, digital really does depend on who you're talking to and what they're actually trying to achieve and whether or not digital can enable that.
You make a really good point there, and that seems to be a theme that we're finding is the interpretation of digital is different across organisations, let alone sectors and individuals. It really does have very different interpretations. So it's a key part to understand that everybody's on the same page and everyone understands what digital does mean to them and the company.
Exactly. And I think that's the real key, because every organisation I've worked in, whether they're going through any form of transformation, it's about really understanding what is it we're trying to achieve. And then you start to look at, okay, so what enabling factors can we implement to make it happen? Rather than saying we've got all of this technology that so happens to be digital, or we're going to create a new website, and then that makes us more digital because we're connecting in with the customer. That doesn't answer the question of what it is we're trying to achieve. And it always, for me, starts with the why. And I love, I'm always evangelizing about the power of the why, because once you understand why, you can then work on the how, the what and the how.
That's really interesting because on that, so different sectors will have different interpretations and different understandings of the why. And that leads me on to a question regarding a major role that you played in one of the largest and most heavily scrutinised digital transformations in the UK at the time for one of the government organisations. Can you talk to us about your role there and your achievements in that digital transformation in some detail and give some context?
Yes, I think you're talking about the post office, where I was there for just over 4 years. It it's interesting because before I joined the post office, I'd looked at the business from the outside in. Well-known brand on the high street. Literally every high street has a post office in operation. And it was, for me, it was just all about the mails and the postal service. But it's much more than that. It's a very, very complex business. And what I discovered, so when I joined in August 2015, Post Office at that time was 3 years in to a 5-year business transformation. And that business transformation included a separation from Royal Mail. So Royal Mail went privatised, Post Office remained wholly owned by the government. And as part of that separation from Royal Mail, it meant splitting out the company, the legal entities of the company, but also the organisational structures of it and the technology that supported it. So Post Office embarked on this 5-year transformation programme. So roll forward 3 years, I land in 2015, and the remit was to do a technology transformation, which engaged a new way of working internally within Post Office. So it was almost like a greenfield site. You know, the phase that was going around the corridors of Post Office was it's a 350-year-old startup. You know, because how do you digitize a company that has that much legacy? Not just in the infrastructure, but also in the people and the processes. So for me, it was a phenomenal opportunity to get to the heart of working for a real British institution that had complexity beyond measure. You know, as I explained before, they have a business process. This is really focused on postal service, so there's a very close connection into Royal Mail with the post office branches. And there were 11,600 post office branches at the time when I joined. And these branches have a wealth of infrastructure that needs to be supported in there, because not only do the branches have to deal with postal services, but they also have to deal with insurance services, which was one of the industries the post office was in, financial services, so banking, mortgages, loans, those sorts of things. Telecommunication was another, and the big element was also on the Home Office partnership. So there was a lot of government services on identity management that was also managed in branch. So it was a very, very complex business model with legacy infrastructure and legacy business processes that needed to move into a digitized capability. And that was quite a challenge. So in I land with a very complex IT structure that is heavily outsourced. I mean, almost entirely outsourced to third-party tier one suppliers, and having to walk the business through how that transformation needs to happen was phenomenal.
How do you start with something like that? Where you've got in, and as you say, 350-year-old startup. First of all, you've got to be thinking about that cultural shift, I would imagine. But what was your thoughts? How did you start to tackle that change?
It's interesting because I can look back and reflect on how I tackled it and the sort of journey I went through, and, you know, down some dead ends and back again, and then changing tact and replanning. But looking back, there were really four main elements that the transformation took on. The first, obviously, was the technology. I mean, that's fundamental. Looking at the legacy technology, transferring it over from the Royal Mail domain into Post Office domain. But supporting that technology, you had the business processes that drove how that technology was constructed. You had the data that sat on that technology. And then you had the cultural change that needed to happen with people realizing, especially people who'd been in Post Office an awful long time and grown up through the Royal Mail era, the level of thinking that was needed and the mind shift change that was needed was phenomenal. Walking away from a very much a Royal Mail led business into a business that needed to stand up on its own feet and grow up. So the cultural shift change, I think, was underestimated at the time. It's only now I can look back and think, that culture did change over time, but it wasn't planned. And it really, when we get on to talking about, business transformation and how you actually do it, especially digital transformation, there is a planning element that needs to happen, and you need to weave the units together, the domains together.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, but one of the critical things is how you engage with your customers in a digital transformation. And as you just alluded to, with that example, the customers were both, I suppose, internal and external customers for the transformation.
Yeah.
One of the things we've discussed with you before, Sharon, is it's critical to understand that customer journey. So for such a complex transformation, I mean, can you talk about, your approach to that? How did you go about it? Things like how often did you check it? Because it must have been absolutely critical to make sure that you got it right from the very start, to make sure that the transformation went as smoothly as it did, really.
Yeah, it's a really great point, because whenever any business is going through transformation, but specifically digital transformation, there are benefits that are identified right at the very beginning. What is it we want to get from this transformation? And that's actually the really easy bit. The conundrum is really looking at, if we want to become much more customer centric, and all businesses raise that as a key element, every mission statement really underlying is about being more customer centric. How do you make that customer centricity actually work? And for me, it was, how do we steer the company into a place that really the customer is at the focal point and the heart of all of our transformation efforts, but specifically digital transformation efforts. And for me, that was really about understanding the customer journey. And the customer journey is the touch points the customer has within the organization. The problem, I think, that we face, certainly in post office, and many organizations face this, is that most businesses are constructed in a hierarchy with very siloed divisions. And each of those siloed divisions will touch a customer point at some point. But until you look across the whole of the division on how that journey is mapped out, it's really difficult to understand which bits to change, because you can change them all individually, but without changing them in a unified way. You can as we did. We had very clear targets within our branch network and within our call center, within our websites, within our apps. All of these have metrics to how you measure customer engagement, and how we have KPIs that we use to help with the performance in those touch points, but not doing it end to end across the whole journey. So a customer coming into post office may start their journey on the web, or they may start it in the branch and end up on the web, or vice versa. So, or call the call center because they've got an issue with a product they already have. In their mind, it's all post office, or it's all IMI, whatever the business is. They don't see, I'm calling the branch, or I'm calling the call center, or I'm looking on the web, or I'm using the app. They want to understand, or they want to feel that the company understands them end to end. And we've only got to look at companies that have really understood this and got this. Amazon, I'm a big fan of the Amazon philosophy of always day one philosophy. And for those of the listeners who haven't heard it, head under a rock or something for the last 10 years. But the Amazon philosophy of day one is about having a culture within an organization that keeps everyone focused on what they're there to do. And for Amazon, that's all about servicing their customers. And that's how they've developed out their innovation over the years, from starting as a online bookseller to becoming what they are today. That's all about listening to the customer and continuously improving that customer journey and the customer touch points. My husband thinks I've got shares in Amazon because it's the only online store that I actually use religiously, practically almost every day for everything from pencil to a lawnmower. Everything I buy literally is from Amazon because I know they know me and I get really great service. And if I want to return something, I can, and it's very easy. I don't have to think about it. And if all businesses used that philosophy in their ambitions to become more customer centric, learn from the best and really understand what is it the Amazon did to make that happen. But it's all about that customer journey and really mapping that out.
You've actually then my next question was going to be based on the Amazon example you just given, so you've saved me a job there, so thank you very much. But the question was going to be, how important is it and how difficult is it to get a truly personalized customer journey? And obviously, again, I was going to say we've seen the Amazon are reaping the rewards of that at the moment, but it must have been even more difficult, potentially with so many legacy systems and such a potentially an old school mentality. That must have been a pretty hard, not a hard sell, but it must have been a pretty hard thing to implement across the business pretty quickly.
Yeah, it is. One of the problems that most businesses have today is the fact they are steeped in legacy. Legacy infrastructure, architecture, legacy business models. That actually makes it so much harder for a business to change quickly and to adapt to changing customer needs. Another great example that I always use is Tesla. Again, another big fan of Tesla. I think that they are a technology company that are moving the automobile industry in a way that you just couldn't have imagined 15 years ago. But what they really do well is they really try to understand how to adapt to changing customer needs. And they've built up an organization that is so agile, they can change really, really quickly. There was an example a couple of years ago where someone tweeted about their Tesla experience where they tried to go to a charging point, one of these fast Tesla charging points, and someone who was inconsiderate had left their car parked there all day, and they couldn't find the person couldn't find another charging point in the close proximity. Elon Musk caught this tweet and responded to the customer and said, I didn't realize this was a problem. Let me look into it and we will address it. Within 6 weeks, Tesla changed their model around how they use the charging point. So if you own a Tesla and you go to a Tesla's fast speed changing point now and your car becomes fully charged, you get charged for idle time. That couldn't happen if the back end customer touch points weren't all joined up. So for me, the biggest problem companies have to face, organizations have to face, is having to break down the silos across their organization and to really address that end-to-end journey. And really, that only can happen well if you relook at the way the organization and the operating model is structured around those customer journeys. So rather than having just a branch network and just a website or a call center, you have the customer journey as the business stream, and that customer journey owner looks at it right across the piece, and they manage it end to end. So if something happens in on the app that needs to be reflected in the store or on the website or in the call center, they can make that happen because they've got the end-to-end visibility of it.
So it's about getting your customers to really engage with you. It sounds like that's and then reacting accordingly to what your customers are telling you. But Amazon, we mentioned them earlier. They do that very well. You buy anything, within a week you get the email or a message saying, how did we do? How was the delivery? Give us a review on the product. How do you manage in an organisation like the Post Office to get your customers to share their journey with you? Because I can imagine that's a more challenging prospect.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, one of the benefits of working for a company specifically like Post Office is that, as I mentioned before, there are 11,600 branches of Post Office across the UK. So there is actually one post office within 3 miles of every adult in the UK.
Wow.
And that is a phenomenal network. So gathering customer feedback is actually pretty easy for a company like Post Office, because virtually everyone uses a post office or parts of their services. So gathering the customer feedback is really about understanding what it is the customer wants you to do, how the customer wants you to engage with them. And that's the important concept, because this isn't about improving the way you do business. It's about improving the way the customer engagement is happening. So improving customer satisfaction for me is really about that individual touch point. It's no good having fantastic website experience if when someone goes into a branch, they literally, they can't find what they want, or they don't get great service, because it tarnishes the brand that the company has. So whether you're in retail or in banking or in finance or whatever it is, that is customer centricity needs to go right across the whole of the organization. So breaking down the silos and really looking at the way the operating model of the business is structured, so that those silos are breaking down and you operate the business on a customer journey basis. So, I'm trying to give you some examples. So if, for instance, I was going to buy a new home and I was using a estate agent, my experience with the estate agent is, I want to look for a new house. I want to go and have a viewing of that house. If I decide I want to purchase it, then I then need to go down the conveyancing route, and then I've got to move home. So there's a number of customer journeys that are involved in estate agents and conveyancing. And it's understanding each of those customer journeys. They all can be different, but they'll have different touch points within the business. You start to restructure the organization. So it's looking at the touch points rather than looking at a function within the business.
I think that's a really good example. I've moved house twice in my adult life, and both times I used different set of lawyers, conveyancers, estate agencies, and my experience was incredibly different across both. I think one was as you've just alluded to, one was incredibly truncated, using different parties for different things, and it was a real challenge. But one was a really seamless. They had a web portal whereby I could check the progress on every status and every step that I was taking, and there was a lot of great real-time communication. So actually, I didn't think about that, but that is a really good example of an excellent customer journey.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I was doing at Post Office when I was the digital channel director. It's creating personas, and it just so happened whilst I was at Post Office, I got married. I moved home, in fact, moved in a completely different area. My mum went to live overseas. So there was a lot of lifestyle changes that I went through. And when I looked at what Post Office actually offer in terms of products, so, postal service, financial services, insurance, telecommunications, identity management, I started to really grasp the customer journey proposition much more fully, because the personas were, Sharon, I wouldn't say my age, but X-age bracket, with, grown-up children, remarried. So there's a number of life events that have happened. So if I'm moving home, what are the things that post office could pick up on in that journey for me? And that's all about, well, I'll need a change of address management. And the Royal Mail change of address service is fantastic there. I may need new insurance because I've got a new home. That's great. I've also just bought a new car because I'm traveling more now because I'm out of town. So there's car insurance there. I'm buying a house, so there's mortgage there. I've just got married. There's life insurance. There's a whole host of life processes that can be drawn up in that customer journey. And by creating these personas specific for a company like Post Office, you then start to build out those journeys and the touch points across the whole of the organization. So, how will that be effective if I went into the branch, or I called the call center, or I went online onto the web, or downloaded an app? How will they all join together so that there is me, Sharon, at the center of how you're offering your services? And then the whole concept for me of post office as a service came out because it was that element of making post office a central point in the customer journey of life, really.
How important are the quick wins that you need to achieve in an organisation that, well, I guess all organisations that are going through any change? Because I know when we spoke in the past, Sharon, you talked about wanting to achieve those quick wins. Mm. How do you go about doing them, and how important are they?
Yeah, well, quick wins are there to keep people motivated because gone are the days. I mean, when I started in IT, in business years and years ago, any IT project, had X years on it. This wasn't weeks or months. It was X number of years. So by the time you've done all the strategy bit, it's very waterfall. You've done all the strategy bit. You know how it needs to be executed. You do all your as-is analysis piece, and you start to walk through the transformation process. By the time you get to the end, you start getting into the implementation. People have lost the will, They've literally glazed over. Everyone's sort of changed out, and they're just very, very, the energy levels are very low. What quick wins do, and specifically in the digital sphere, because digital execution now has this agile flavor to it, because you need to prove the capability very, very quickly to keep the credibility of we are on the right path, but also to keep people interested. And without quick wins, or as I like to say, quick failures, I mean, you need both. Yeah. You end up wasting a lot of time and energy in people's commitment because you don't know whether you're on the right path or not until you've gone so far down the line. You just got to make it work, come hell or high water, which isn't really the right approach that you want. So, designing in quick wins, and I love the Agile Scrum methodology of getting sprints delivering either through the minimal viable product stance of getting, testing your theory and getting some quick results, and rescoping it and then going again. And that iterative cycle is really important. Without it, I think that's one of the big reasons why a lot of transformations, specifically in the past, some very well-known ones that failed spectacularly because they didn't get that process right.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that we've spoken about before, Sharon, whereby you've given us some examples of maybe some creative or innovative ways of generating excitement and quick wins and failures. I think we spoke at length before about the role that the graduates played in some of your digital transformations. Could you talk about that in terms of how did you generate excitement and interest in those stakeholders that maybe were a bit more resistant to change initially? How did that come about?
Yeah, specifically digital transformation is seen as a new thing in a lot of business, especially legacy businesses that have been around for a long time. So you've got a level of age differentiators between, your earlier question of what does digital mean to you really depends on who you ask and their experiences. And the example of my friend's son very innocently asking me, well, what does digital actually mean? Younger people, Generation X people and the millennials have grown up in a digital world. Most people over the age of 45 didn't grow up in a digital world. They grew up in an analog world where everything was still very manual in the way things are operating. So there is a difference in thinking. I've always been a big advocate of technology. Right from a very, very young age, I've always been interested in improving things and making things work better. So when technology came along to enable that, it was great for me because I really, really got excited by it. So I always look at, why do people not get excited by it? Why do some people not get excited by it and other people do? And it's all about your experience and where you sit in the journey. So one of the big elements of change of digital transformation is about change management, and part of that is how you manage people through the journey, through their understanding of organizational change. So I always advocate myself as a change manager or a change master, much more so than just a technologist or data expert or process expert. So I built out a capability of really understanding that, you can have the best strategy in the world. You can have the best technology people that, working on that strategy. You can have the best data management capability there. If you don't manage how people see and get involved in the transformation and bring them along on the journey, it will almost inevitably fail, because all transformation is fundamentally about people and people doing something different. That's what it is about. So when I was again at post office, a really, really interesting culture because of the separation from Royal Mail, still very much a government-run business. So there was some element of a civil servant mentality in some of the people who had been there quite a long time. But there were new leaders coming in, like myself, who came from outside of the public sector, so from the private sector into post office, with a different way of thinking. But again, there was the age differences across the organisation. There was different elements. So there was quite a mix of cultures coming together during my time at post office. But I really wanted to push the thought process that really came from our younger colleagues, those who were on our graduate programme, or those that were coming through the apprenticeship schemes, because they really think different. And it didn't hit me as much as when because I was a sponsor of the apprenticeship scheme. And I had these new apprentices that I was giving a sort of town hall presentation to. And I was talking about what we do at post office in very simple terms around, how we operate and what we do and the technology that we're using, and with teaching them how to use emails and what they needed to do. And one guy, I never forget this, in the meeting, he sort of gingerly held up his hand and he asked the question, which actually had me floored. His question was, what's the purpose of email? And it actually stopped me in the tracks. And I said, well, it's the way we communicate with people. And he sort of put his hand down, he looked around, he still looked puzzled. And because I read people very well, I said, yeah, that obviously didn't answer your question. He said, no, he said, but, why don't you use, and he started, talking about, texting and using instant messaging rather than using email. I said, well, sometimes you just need to create a document and you need to email it to people. But afterwards, I walked away and I thought, there is a real legacy that we sit with. And, using email is a classic one. I mean, email's 40 years old now, 50 years old. And we still use it to this day as the primary means of communication. Certainly back then in 2016, that was the key element. Why do we not rethink how we're using email? So I actually got some of these apprentices to do what I call reverse mentoring with our exec, and to meet with our exec as mentors, as millennial mentors, to help the older leadership team really understand how the new generation of our workforce and our customers are actually coming through, so that we can really start to understand, well, how, why have we structured ourselves in this way? Why do we use emails? Having people come in who aren't the experts can ask the dumb questions that make you really start to think. It's not a dumb question, actually. It was a really thought-provoking question, but it makes you rethink.
It's a simple question, isn't it? Yeah.
It is a very, very simple question, but people who have been in an area for a long time or are experts in their field take these things for granted and just live with it. And it's an assumption that it can't be changed.
It's about challenging the status quo, isn't it? That's
Absolutely.
it. Because otherwise, and that's it. There is no such thing as a silly question. You ask it once and get someone in with a fresh perspective, fresh eyes to why do we do it like that? And typically it's we've always done it that way. Exactly. I remember reading, I think it was John Lewis, whether they still do it or not, I don't know. They used to do a back to the floor exercise with their senior leadership teams, where they would take people from board level and actually spend a week working in the warehouses, on the shop floors, and actually speaking to the people who do the day-to-day, so that they could better understand what they needed to do as an organisation, how they should adapt and change, and listening to people who do the role rather than just assuming. And I think that's something you've talked about in the past, is you can't assume that everyone knows what you know, and vice versa. So it's a really clever approach, that reverse mentorship. I love it.
Yeah, it really is, because as I said, it probes you to really think. And as you said before, no question is a dumb question. If someone's asking you a question, well, why are you using email? Why do we use email? What's the purpose of it? Is there another better way of doing things? Like sending around documents to, hundreds of people on an email. Can't guarantee that they've read it. There's a better way of doing it. There's more collaborative tools to use. So, but I can see a time where email in business starts to be eroded, especially internal business. We should really relook at how we use these technologies now.
You're absolutely right. I'm just thinking about things like WhatsApp, because when you send a message to your friends, you think, I know you've read it. I can see that you've read it. There's
instead of voicemails, it could be we could leave WhatsApp voice messages now instead of voicemails, couldn't we? And then we can see when people have read them. That's a great idea.
Yeah, exactly. I know you read this at 11:30. I must have missed it. I must have skipped. Oh no, I'm not having that. Yeah.
So what advice, Sharon, would you give to other organisations that maybe are, stuck in the legacy way of working, that haven't had to be kind of dragged, into the 21st century digitally yet? Any kind of critical get-rights or common pitfalls to avoid in your experience?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is that digital transformation is definitely not for the faint-hearted. I think people really do underestimate the level of change that's needed within an organization to really make it happen. I've been on countless transformation programs that have had a really great ambition, really great objective. The strategy's been written. Everyone really falls behind it. But then when you start to get into the execution, that's where the difficulty comes in. So for me, the greatest advice I can give anyone looking to go down this line of digital transformation is that you've really got to understand that the reality of doing digital transformation is that you've got to bring people together, and you've got to have a coordinated effort across, I would say, 4 main domains of what you're doing. That's around, the technology, the data, the processes, and then the whole thing around change management and organizational change. Because without those 4 coming together, you just start, if you try to do one without the other 3, it really does start to break down. So no matter how well conceived the idea is, the communication of the vision and getting the plan crafted and adjusting to it on the fly, you have to bring it all together with the right people. So you need people who are very strong technologists to lead the technology and speak in business language to make it really compelling. You need the data scientists, so you need people who really understand how to make use of all this unstructured data, all the data that fits across the organization under people's desks in computers that they haven't really looked at, that isn't bringing any value. You need to really understand where it all sits, and then the processes that bring it all together. So having process redesign within the mix is really, really key. So I think people really need to understand that this is all about changing and bringing together these domains and really understanding how you manage change into the organization, because that's a continuous thing. My role really in IMI critical engineering is fundamentally about that change capability and bringing the leadership in to bring the teamwork, bring people together into a team working environment, giving them the courage and the motivation and the intelligence to be able to execute against it, and to be able to see that where people are going to struggle, it's really because they're worried about their jobs. That's fundamentally what people worry about digital transformation in, is that you bring in AI, it then fundamentally changes what I do. Really understanding it and knowing that that's where people's fears are coming from, and managing those fears through retraining, making them understand a new way of working and making them feel valued, that their input into that new way of working is absolutely critical to success, will help organizations.
Completely agree.
Sharon, thanks so much for coming on the podcast with us today. It's been really, really interesting, and there's some great insight there. For the listeners, if you want to reach out to Sharon, you can reach her on LinkedIn on Sharon Prior, or myself. If you have any questions, I'm at dave.campbell@practicus.com.
And I'm at james.rosen@practicus.com.
Sharon, thanks ever so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's been great.
That's a wrap.